Daniel Bennett kissed his wife goodbye, picked up his suitcase and walked out the door with a smile so practiced it looked real. He had done it 8 times. Same jacket, same excuse, same lie. And every single year, Olivia stood at that door and believed him. But this year, she had already called the hotel. There was no reservation. There had never been one. Not once. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart and had it used against you, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The first time Olivia noticed something was wrong, she told herself she was being paranoid. It was a Tuesday evening in early October, and Daniel was at the kitchen counter checking something on his phone with that particular stillness he had developed over the past few years. His thumb moved slowly, deliberately, like a man making sure he was reading something correctly. Olivia had walked into the room quietly carrying a cup of coffee, and for just a moment she caught a glimpse of his expression before he looked up. It was not the face of a man reading work emails. It was something softer than that, something private, something that did not belong to her. "Hey," he said, and the phone flipped face down before she had even set the mug on the counter. "Hey," she said back. She did not ask about the phone. She never did. That was the kind of marriage they had built together, a comfortable one, she had always told herself. A mature one. 2 people who respected each other's space. 2 people who trusted each other without needing to ask every small question. But that night, lying in bed while Daniel slept beside her, with the easy, undisturbed breathing of a man with nothing on his conscience, Olivia stared at the ceiling for a long time, and she thought about the way his thumb had moved on that screen. And she thought about the way his face had looked before he noticed her standing there. She pushed the thought away. She was good at pushing thoughts away. She had been practicing for years. Olivia Bennett was 44 years old, and she had been married to Daniel for 11 years. Before she was Olivia Bennett, she was Olivia Carver, a woman who had worked her way up from a junior analyst position at a mid-sized firm in Cincinnati to become one of the most respected financial analysts in her department. She was methodical. She was precise. She was not a woman who missed details, which was why the details had started to matter. Daniel was a senior operations manager at a logistics company downtown, and every October, without exception, he flew to Chicago for what he called the annual leadership summit. A week of meetings, he explained. Long days, late dinners with executives. The hotel Wi-Fi was always bad, the schedule always packed, and the time difference, even though Chicago was only 1 hour ahead, somehow always made it difficult for him to call at the time she expected. The first year, Olivia had thought nothing of it. The second year, she had packed his suitcase herself, tucked a handwritten note inside between his shirts, and spent the week making sure the house was clean and the refrigerator was stocked for when he came home. The third year, she started noticing that the photos he sent her looked strange, not in an obvious way, not in a way she could point to directly and name, but there was something about the images that made her pause every time she looked at them. They were always taken from the same angle, always showing the same kind of background, a beige wall, a narrow window, the edge of what looked like a bed or a desk. He always looked rested. He always looked clean. He never looked the way men look after a full week of corporate meetings and conference dinners. He looked like a man on vacation. She mentioned it once casually over the phone on the 3rd night of his 4th trip. "You look really good in those photos," she said. "Not tired at all. Is the summit not as exhausting this year?" There was a pause, short but there, a half-second where the rhythm of conversation broke before he filled it back in. "I've been trying to sleep more," he said. "I've been making better choices, turning in earlier, skipping the late networking events." "That's good," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'll tell you all about it when I get home." He never did. By year 5, Olivia had started cataloging things in the back of her mind without even meaning to. The way he always paid for his flights in cash instead of using the card she managed. The way he became oddly irritable in the 2 weeks before each trip, like a man preparing himself for something difficult, not something routine. The way he came home each year looking different, not exhausted, not jet-lagged, but somehow realigned. Like a man who had just spent a week in the version of his life that actually made him feel like himself. She told herself these things meant nothing. She told herself she was reading too deeply into ordinary behavior. She told herself that 11 years of marriage had simply made her hypersensitive to small shifts, and that the anxiety she was feeling was her own problem to manage. And then something happened that she had not planned for, and it changed everything. It was a Saturday morning in early September, the month before Daniel's 8th annual trip, and Olivia was sorting through old emails, trying to find a receipt for a home appliance warranty. She had opened Daniel's laptop because hers was charging in the other room, and he had never asked her not to use it, so she did not think twice. She opened the browser. She navigated to her email account. And as she typed in the search bar, the browser autocomplete offered her something she had never searched for herself. A hotel name, the Grand Meridian Chicago. She recognized it. It was the hotel Daniel always mentioned, the place he said the company booked for all the summit attendees. She had heard the name so many times over 8 years that it was practically ordinary, but she had never actually looked it up before. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then, without making a conscious decision, she clicked on it. The hotel's website opened. It was a nice place. Mid-range business hotel, the kind of unremarkable, dependable establishment that companies used for conferences. Nothing unusual. She looked at it for a moment, then almost without thinking, she clicked through to the contact page. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number. The line rang twice, and then a pleasant voice answered. "Good morning, thank you for calling the Grand Meridian Chicago. How can I help you?" Olivia cleared her throat. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm trying to confirm a reservation under the name Daniel Bennett, Bennett. My husband usually stays with you every October for a corporate summit, and I just wanted to verify the booking dates." A pause. Keyboard clicks. She could hear the faint sound of an office in the background, another phone ringing, someone talking. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "Could you repeat the last name?" "Bennett, Daniel Bennett." More clicking. A longer pause this time. "I'm not finding anything under that name. Do you have a confirmation number?" Olivia's throat tightened. "No, I don't, but he stays every year. He's been coming every October for at least 4 or 5 years. The woman's voice remained polite, professional. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not showing any reservation history for that name. Is it possible it's booked under a different name, or perhaps a different Meridian property?" "No," Olivia said quietly. "No, it's this location. Thank you." She ended the call. She set the phone down on the table. She sat without moving. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear Daniel moving around, getting ready for his Saturday workout, completely unaware that the world had just shifted underneath her feet. She thought about calling back. She thought about calling the wrong number. She thought about all the reasonable, innocent explanations a woman could offer herself in that moment if she really needed to. But Olivia Bennett was a financial analyst. She worked with data. She dealt in patterns. And the pattern sitting in front of her right now was not innocent. She made 2 more calls that afternoon, both while Daniel was at the gym. The first was to a different location of the same hotel chain, just to make sure she had not misunderstood something about the reservation system. No Daniel Bennett. The second was to the corporate travel coordinator at Daniel's company, a woman named Brenda, whom Olivia had met once at a holiday party and had always seemed straightforward. She told Brenda she was helping Daniel organize tax receipts from past business trips and asked casually whether Brenda could confirm the hotel the company had used for the annual Chicago summit over the past few years. Brenda was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," Brenda said carefully. "Our company hasn't hosted a leadership summit in Chicago. We do regional meetings, but Chicago isn't one of our locations. I don't know where that information came from." The call lasted 30 more seconds. Pleasantries. Apologies for the confusion. Goodbye. Olivia put the phone face down on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the cool surface of the kitchen island. 8 years, 8 trips, 8 weeks of her life she would never get back. She stood in her own kitchen in the middle of a Saturday afternoon and let the full weight of the reality press down on her chest. She did not cry. She had not cried yet. She was still in that strange suspended space that sits between understanding something and feeling it, the way you can look at a photograph that makes no sense and understand intellectually that something is wrong long before your heart catches up. She heard Daniel's car pull into the garage. She heard the door open. She heard his footsteps in the mudroom. "Hey," he called out. "I grabbed coffee on the way back. You want one?" "Sure," she said. Her voice came out normal, completely normal. She was surprised by that. He walked into the kitchen looking the way he always looked after a workout, flushed, easy, satisfied with himself. He handed her a coffee cup. He kissed her on the cheek. He asked what she had been doing all morning. "Going through old receipts," she said. "The usual boring stuff." "Find anything interesting?" he asked, already turning toward the refrigerator. "Not yet," she said, and she watched him move around her kitchen with the comfortable confidence of a man who had never been caught, who had never expected to be caught, who had long since stopped asking himself whether his wife might be smart enough to look. He had forgotten perhaps who he had married. Olivia spent the next 3 weeks being very careful. She did not change her behavior. She did not become cold or distant. She did not ask strange questions or stay up too late or cry in the bathroom where he might hear her. She continued making dinner on the nights they ate together. She continued asking about his day. She continued sitting beside him on the couch on Sunday nights, watching the shows they had always watched together. But underneath all of that, she was working. She began pulling together records, financial records specifically because that was the language she knew best, the one she could read without making a single sound. She started with the household accounts, the ones she managed, the ones where she paid their mortgage and utilities and groceries. She looked for patterns she might have been too trusting to notice before. What she found in the first week alone was enough to make her hands go still. In October of each year, every year, there were withdrawals from their shared savings account, not enormous ones, never large enough to trigger the alert she had set up years ago for large transactions, but consistent, ranging from $800 to $1,200 each October, always within the week that Daniel was supposedly in Chicago. She went back 8 years, 8 withdrawals, nearly $9,000. She sat at her desk late on a Thursday night, the house dark and quiet, Daniel asleep upstairs, and she stared at the numbers on her screen and understood with absolute clarity that she had been funding a lie. But the money was only the beginning. She had a brother named Michael, 6 years older than her, a quiet and steady man who had spent 15 years working as a private investigator before retiring to help run a small consulting firm. She had called Michael once years ago when she thought someone was tampering with her car. She called him again now. She met him for lunch the following Friday at a small place across town where neither of them would run into anyone they knew. She brought a folder. Inside were the bank records, the hotel confirmation she had requested and not received, the call log from Brenda at Daniel's company, and the photographs from the past 3 years of Chicago trips, the ones that had always felt strange to her, the ones she had looked at dozens of times without being able to name what was wrong. Michael sat across from her and listened without speaking. He was that kind of person, the kind who could absorb a lot of information without reacting, who could hold everything you said without letting any of it fall. When she finished, he picked up one of the photographs. He looked at it for a long moment. "This isn't a hotel room," he said. "I know. The lighting, the way the furniture sits in the frame, this is a private residence." "I know," she said again. Michael looked at her. "How long have you been sitting on this?" "3 weeks. And you haven't said anything to him?" "No." He nodded slowly. He understood. He knew his sister. He knew she would not move until she was sure. "What do you want to do?" She had thought about this answer for 3 weeks. She had turned it over in the dark at 2 in the morning. She had held it while washing dishes, while driving to the grocery store, while sitting beside her husband on the couch, pretending to watch television. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. "I want to follow him," she said. "Next month, when he goes to Chicago. I want to know what he's actually doing, who he's doing it with, and where the money is going." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a reasonable plan." "I know," she said. "I've thought it through. Do you want my help?" She looked at him across the table. She thought about the 10 years she had spent being the kind of woman who did not make problems, the kind of woman who looked away from things that made her uncomfortable, the kind of woman who carried her own doubts quietly and blamed herself for the distance she felt growing in her marriage. "Yes," she said, "I want your help." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Michael reached out to a contact he still trusted from his investigative days, a man named Ray, who worked freelance and knew how to move through a city without drawing attention. Together, Michael and Ray began pulling what public records they could access on Daniel's business activities, corporate filings, property records, business registrations, the kind of paper trail that most people never thought to hide because most people never expected their spouse to know where to look. What Ray found in the first 72 hours of searching was the first real twist. Daniel Bennett had quietly registered a limited liability company 6 years ago. The company was named with a generic string of initials that looked like 100 other small business entities. It had no publicly visible web presence, no customer-facing identity, no apparent commercial purpose. But it had assets. Specifically, it had a property. A townhouse in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. The registration date was 6 years ago. Olivia did the math without even meaning to. 6 years ago was the year after their miscarriage, the year she had spent in grief when Daniel had become distant in ways she had attributed to sadness, when she had spent months asking herself what she was doing wrong, what she had failed to provide, why her marriage suddenly felt like she was living in it alone. She held that information inside herself for 2 full days before she could look at it again. 6 years. A company, a property, registered and maintained. Not a mistake, not a weakness, not a man who had stumbled into something complicated. A choice, repeated over and over for 6 years. She did not cry when she found out. She sat very still. She breathed. She filed the information away in the part of her mind that had always been the strongest. The part that dealt in facts, that measured reality without flinching, that knew the difference between what she wished were true and what actually was. Then she booked her flight. She booked it under her maiden name, Olivia Carver, one way to Chicago, departing the morning after Daniel's flight. She paid cash at the airport kiosk. She told no one, not her friends, not her colleagues, not even her mother, who called every Sunday and would have asked too many questions. The night before Daniel left, she made his favorite dinner, roasted chicken the way he liked it with the herbs she kept in small pots on the kitchen windowsill. She poured wine. She asked him about work. She laughed at something he said. She was, to every external observation, a woman who had no idea what the next 48 hours would reveal. When he kissed her goodnight and said he would call her from the airport in the morning, she said she would be waiting. She lay in the dark for 3 hours before she slept. And when she finally closed her eyes, she was not afraid. She was ready. The morning Daniel left, she stood at the front door the way she always had. She watched him load his black suitcase into his car. She watched him pause at the driver's side door, turn back, wave at her, with a smile that looked so genuine she almost second-guessed herself. Almost. She raised her hand. She waved back. She watched the car disappear down the street. Then she walked back inside, picked up the bag she had packed the night before, quiet, efficient, already organized the way she organized everything, and she called a car to take her to the airport. She arrived at O'Hare 4 hours before Daniel's connecting flight was scheduled to land. She found a seat at a cafe near the arrivals gate, with a clear sightline and a cup of coffee she barely touched. She had her phone. She had her earbuds. She looked like every other traveler sitting alone in an airport waiting for someone else's story to begin. Michael had texted her that morning. 3 words. "Are you sure?" She had texted back too. "Absolutely, yes." And then she sat. And she waited. And when Daniel walked through those arrival doors with his black suitcase rolling behind him, looking like a man who had just escaped something and arrived at something better, Olivia sat very still in her airport cafe chair and did not move. She watched him scan the crowd. She watched his face change, that small, involuntary shift that crosses a person's face when they see someone they love. That private softening that had nothing to do with habit and everything to do with feeling. She watched him look toward the far end of the arrivals area, and she followed his gaze, and she saw her, a woman in her late 30s, dressed simply, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder. She was not what Olivia had imagined, not glamorous, not dramatic, not the kind of woman you expected from a story like this. She looked ordinary. She looked warm. She looked like someone who belonged in a quiet life. She looked like someone who had no idea she was the second act of a marriage built on deception. Daniel did not slow down when he saw her. He walked directly toward her, the same confident stride Olivia had watched for 11 years. And the woman opened her arms. His name was Claire Morgan. And in that moment, watching her husband step into the embrace of another woman in the middle of a crowded airport arrivals hall, Olivia Carver Bennett felt the last remaining piece of uncertainty dissolve entirely. She had not been wrong. She had never been wrong. She had simply been the last one to know. She pressed her back against the chair. She breathed. She watched them walk away together toward the parking structure, Daniel's hand resting on Claire's back, the way it had once rested on hers, naturally, without thought. The way a man touches someone he has long since stopped pretending to himself is temporary. She did not follow them on foot. She had a car arranged. Michael had been thorough. She sat in the back seat of a nondescript sedan driven by Ray, and she watched from a careful distance as Daniel and Claire drove north out of the city center and into a neighborhood of quiet streets and private homes and lives that looked nothing at all like conferences and leadership summits and missed phone calls because of bad hotel Wi-Fi. The car stopped at a townhouse behind a private gate. Claire unlocked it. Daniel carried his suitcase inside. The door closed. Olivia sat in the back seat of that car with her hands folded in her lap and stared at the address on the front of the building her husband owned, the building her husband had owned for 6 years, the building that had been purchased, maintained, and returned to year after year while she stood at a front door in Cincinnati, waving goodbye and trusting a man who had learned somewhere along the way that her trust was the one thing he never had to earn. She photographed everything. The address, the gate number, the vehicle registration, the timestamp on her phone. She was systematic about it. She was precise. She was every inch the financial analyst who knew that evidence had to be clean and documented and unimpeachable if it was ever going to mean anything. And then she sat back. And for the first time since she had called that hotel on a Saturday morning and heard a stranger's voice tell her that Daniel Bennett did not exist in their system, she let herself feel it, all of it. The years of doubting herself, the years of making herself smaller to fit inside a marriage that had been fractured from the inside long before she noticed the cracks, the miscarriage she had carried alone while Daniel was quietly building a second life. The nights she had lain awake wondering what was wrong with her, what she had done, why the man she loved had slowly become someone she could feel but not reach. None of it had been her fault. All of it had been a choice he made. She sat in that car on a quiet street in Chicago, and she let herself understand the full truth of it. Not the softened version. Not the version that left room for uncertainty or misunderstanding, or the small mercies women give themselves when they are not yet ready to know what they already know. The full version. And then very deliberately she closed that door inside herself. She was not done. She was only just beginning. She texted Michael. "I have the address, the property. I've seen them together." His reply came back in under a minute. "I'm already digging. Come home when you're ready." She looked out the window at the townhouse gate, at the building her husband had bought with money that had passed through her hands, through accounts she managed, through a life she had helped build year by year without knowing what it was funding. She took one more photograph. Then she asked Ray to drive her to the airport. She had a flight to catch, she had a folder to build, and she had a husband coming home in 6 days who had no idea that the woman who had always been waiting for him at the door had spent this week following him instead, quietly, precisely, without a single word of warning. The woman who always waited was gone. The woman who had finally decided to look had taken her place, and she was not going to stop until every single truth was sitting on that kitchen table between them. Ray drove her back to the airport without a word. That was the thing about good investigators. They understood that some moments did not need to be filled with sound. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, and he let Olivia sit in the back seat with everything she had just seen pressing down on her chest, like a stone she could not lift and could not put down. She had her phone in her hand, but she was not looking at it. She was staring out the window at the city moving past her, and she was doing the thing she had always done when the world became too large and too complicated to hold all at once. She was organizing. Inside her mind, she was building a structure, a clean, ordered framework around the facts. She now possessed the way she would organize a financial report that contained numbers she did not want to believe but could not argue with. Fact 1. Her husband had lied to her for 8 years. Fact 2. He had purchased a property in this city using money that had passed through their shared life. Fact 3. There was a woman named Claire Morgan, and whatever that relationship was, it was not new and it was not casual. Fact 4. None of this had been a mistake. She repeated those 4 facts to herself in order, like a woman reciting something she needed to memorize before she could be tested on it. Because the version of her that wanted to find the exits, the version that wanted to say, maybe there was an explanation, maybe she had misread something, maybe the hotel records were wrong, that version needed to be silenced by facts. And the facts were unambiguous. She texted Michael one more time before she boarded. 6 years, Michael. The property was registered 6 years ago. His reply came as she was walking down the jet bridge. I know, Ray already confirmed it. Come home. We need to sit down with everything. She put the phone in her pocket and found her seat and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She thought about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, Olivia had been 38 years old, and she and Daniel had been trying for 2 years to have a child. When she got pregnant, they had both actually cried together at the kitchen table, in a way they had not cried together before or since. She remembered how he had held her hands. She remembered thinking that whatever distance had opened up between them over the previous year, the pregnancy was going to close it. That they were going to become the family they had always said they wanted to be. She lost the baby at 14 weeks. The months that followed were the loneliest of her life. Daniel had grieved too, she knew that, but he had grieved in a way that looked a lot like disappearing. He worked longer hours. He was quieter at home. He stopped reaching for her at night. And Olivia, who had been trained since childhood to look inward first, when something went wrong had spent those months asking herself what she had done to push him away. Whether her grief had been too heavy, whether she had needed too much from him, whether she had become in some way she could not precisely name too much to be with. And all that time, all those months of self-examination and quiet suffering and lying awake at night, wondering what was wrong with her, Daniel had been in Chicago, not grieving, not pulling away out of pain, building something, putting his name on a property, settling into a life that had nothing to do with her or their loss or the family they were supposed to become. She pressed her forehead against the cold oval of the airplane window and breathed. She had been grieving a miscarriage while he was signing a lease. She let that truth sit inside her and she did not push it away. She was going to need to feel every part of it before she could do what came next. When she landed in Cincinnati, it was late evening, the kind of quiet, forgettable evening that had no idea. It was the night after which everything would be different. She took a car home. She let herself into the house. She stood in the entryway for a moment, looking at the familiar space, the framed photographs on the wall, the coat rack by the door, the small bowl on the console table where Daniel always dropped his keys. Everything looked the same. Nothing was the same. She changed her clothes, made a cup of tea. She did not finish and sat down at her desk. She pulled out every document she had been quietly accumulating over the past 3 weeks. The bank records, the hotel confirmation failure, the call with Brenda, the photographs from Chicago. She organized them into a clean, logical sequence, the way she organized any financial investigation by date, by category, by degree of significance. Then she went to bed. She slept 4 hours. She woke before dawn, and she called her brother. Michael arrived at her house at 7:30 in the morning with 2 coffees and a folder of his own. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel would sit in 6 days when he came home from his trip expecting nothing, and he opened his folder without preamble. "All right," he said. "I want to start with the company." "Tell me everything," she said. The company was called DBL Consulting Group, LLC. The name was generic enough to disappear into any business search without drawing attention. It had been registered in Illinois 6 years ago, 3 months after Daniel and Olivia's miscarriage. The registered agent was a law firm that specialized in small business formations, the kind of firm that asked few questions and provided maximum privacy. "I was careful," Michael said. "Whoever helped him set this up knew what they were doing. The company has no website, no listed employees, no public-facing business activity. On paper, it looks like a dormant consulting entity." "But it's not dormant," Olivia said. "No. It owns the property you photographed yesterday, the townhouse. The mortgage payments have been made consistently for 6 years, never missed, always on time." Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Where is the money coming from?" Michael looked at her steadily. "That's the part we need to talk about." She held his gaze and waited. "The company has a business account," he said. "The account receives regular transfers. Some of them are traceable to Daniel's personal accounts that aren't joint accounts you probably don't have access to." She had not known about separate accounts. Of course she hadn't. She had managed their shared finances so efficiently, so trustingly, that she had never thought to look for the ones she wasn't being shown. "How much?" she asked. "Over 6 years, we're still calculating, but what we can see right now is somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. The number landed like something physical. She felt it in her sternum. $40,000 to $60,000, she repeated. "Some of it came from your shared accounts," Michael said. His voice was careful, deliberate, the voice of a man who had delivered hard truths to people before and knew that the delivery mattered. The withdrawals were small enough to avoid triggering alerts, but they were consistent, every October, sometimes in the months before. We're looking at approximately $9,000 from the joint account alone over 8 years. She thought about this careful automatic alert she had set on their shared account years ago for large transactions. She had felt so responsible setting it up, so thorough, so trustworthy. He had known exactly how to work around it. "He knew how I had the account set up," she said. It was not a question. "He knew," Michael confirmed. Whoever's helping him, or whether he figured this out himself, the withdrawals were calibrated. She stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window and stood with her back to Michael for a moment. She needed 10 seconds without being looked at. She thought about the word calibrated. Not careless, not impulsive, calibrated. She turned back around. "Is there more?" Michael hesitated, just briefly. Just enough for her to know that what came next was the part he had been deciding how to say since he walked in the door. "His mother knows," Michael said. The room went very still. "What?" Olivia said. "I'm not certain of the extent," he said carefully. But Ray spoke to someone, a neighbor in the area, a woman who lives 2 doors down from the townhouse in Chicago. She mentioned that she had seen an older woman visiting the property on several occasions, driving a car, staying for a few hours. She described her well enough that I was able to match the description. Olivia sat back down at the table. Sandra Bennett, Daniel's mother. The woman who had over the past 6 years made a point of commenting on Olivia's appearance at family gatherings, who had said at Thanksgiving 3 years ago that Olivia looked tired, who had offered in the months after the miscarriage the kind of comfort that always seemed to have a small barb inside it. Comments about Olivia having changed, about Olivia being less present than she used to be, about Daniel needing a certain kind of energy around him that Olivia might want to work on providing. Olivia had absorbed every one of those comments in silence. She had told herself that Sandra was simply a difficult woman, that it was not personal, that the passive criticism was a generational pattern, not a targeted campaign. But if Sandra had known about Claire, if Sandra had sat in that townhouse, had been introduced, had been made part of the secret, then those comments had not been careless. They had been deliberate. Sandra had been doing what people do when they need someone to look in the wrong direction. She had been redirecting Olivia's doubt back toward herself. "How long?" Olivia asked. Her voice was very quiet. "We don't know for certain," Michael said. But the neighbor mentioned the visit started at least 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, Olivia had started seeing a therapist to work through the distance in her marriage. She had sat in a comfortable chair in a quiet office and talked about her self-doubt, her fear of not being enough, her grief over the miscarriage and its long shadow on her relationship. She had done the work. She had opened herself up and examined everything she might be doing wrong. Sandra Bennett had known. Sandra had sat in that Chicago townhouse, and she had come home to family dinners and looked Olivia in the eyes and kept the secret without a flicker. Olivia breathed in slowly through her nose, out through her mouth. "Okay," she said. Michael watched her. "Are you all right?" "No," she said, "but I'm going to be. Keep going." He kept going. Over the next 4 hours, they went through everything. Michael walked her through every document, every record, every thread of the investigation Ray had managed to pull together in the past 3 weeks. They talked about what was usable as evidence, what would require more time to verify, and what the next steps looked like from a legal standpoint. Olivia had already called an attorney. She had done that in the second week quietly without telling anyone. A woman named Patricia Hale, who specialized in divorce and financial litigation, and who had been referred to Olivia by a colleague at work who had been through something not entirely different 4 years ago. Patricia had been direct and methodical and had asked all the right questions, and when Olivia finished laying out what she knew, Patricia had been quiet for a moment and then said, "You've done good work. Let's make sure we do the rest of it correctly." Good work. That was what it had taken. Years of being a woman who was precise and thorough and unafraid of numbers, and now those skills were the ones keeping her upright. She and Michael worked until noon. When they finished, she walked him to the door. He stopped on the front step and looked at her with the expression that older brothers use when they want to say something they are not sure they have the right to say. "Olivia." "I know," she said. "You don't have to do the next 6 days alone." "I know," she said again. "I can be here." She shook her head. If you're here when Daniel comes home, he'll know something is wrong. I need him to walk in that door thinking everything is exactly the way he left it." Michael studied her face. He was looking for the crack. He was a man who had spent 15 years reading people for a living, and he was looking at his little sister to find the place where she was actually falling apart. He did not find it, not because it wasn't there, but because Olivia had learned over the past 3 weeks how to hold herself together with a specific and purposeful tension that did not show on the surface. She had learned how to be two things at once, the woman who was devastated and the woman who was not finished yet. "Call me," he said. "Every day," she promised. She closed the door. She stood alone in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back to her desk and kept working. The next 6 days were the strangest of her life. Daniel called on the first evening right on schedule. The call lasted 11 minutes. He asked how she was doing. He said the conference was busy. He sounded relaxed in a way she now understood was not the relaxation of a man unwinding from professional stress, but the relaxation of a man who had arrived where he actually wanted to be. She asked all the normal questions. How are the sessions going? Have you eaten well? Did you sleep on the flight? She asked them in the same tone she had used for 8 years, the patient-interested tone of a woman who cared, and she listened to his answers with one part of her mind, while the other part sat very still and watched him perform the husband role from 1,000 miles away. "I miss you," he said near the end of the call. She paused for exactly the right length of time. "Miss you too," she said. She ended the call and set the phone down on the desk and sat without moving for a long moment. He had said it so easily. That was the part she kept returning to over and over in the long, quiet hours of those 6 days. Not the betrayal itself, she had moved past the shock of that, had metabolized it into something harder and more purposeful, but the ease of it. The way he moved between the two versions of his life without apparent friction. The way he could hold Claire's hand and sleep in that Chicago townhouse, and then pick up the phone and tell his wife he missed her all in the same evening, all with the same voice, and feel nothing that showed. She wondered whether he had ever felt it. She wondered whether there had ever been a single night in 6 years where he lay awake in that townhouse and thought about what he was doing to her. She decided she was probably never going to know the answer to that, and that the answer probably wouldn't help her anyway. She kept working. Patricia Hale called on the 3rd day with news about the financial documentation. "We've got enough," Patricia said. "The withdrawals from the joint account, the property records, the company registration taken together. This constitutes financial misconduct in any jurisdiction that matters. The question is whether we go for a clean divorce settlement or whether we pursue the full financial litigation." "Both," Olivia said without hesitating. A brief pause. "That's aggressive. Is it wrong?" "No," Patricia said. "It's not wrong. It's the correct response to what he's done. I just want to make sure you understand what the next several months will look like." "I understand," Olivia said. "I want every dollar that belongs to me recovered. I want the property included in the asset assessment. I want the company on record." "Then that's what we'll do," Patricia said. After the call, Olivia sat at her desk and thought about the word aggressive. She had been described as aggressive before by clients who did not like being told that their numbers were wrong, by colleagues who thought a woman who caught errors was being difficult rather than thorough. She had always softened herself in response to that word, had pulled back, had recalibrated to be more palatable. Not this time. On the 5th day, Ray sent Michael a photograph. Michael forwarded it to Olivia with a single line of text, "You need to see this." The photograph had been taken outside the Chicago townhouse. It showed Daniel and Claire standing at the front gate. They were not touching. They were looking at something together, a piece of paper or perhaps a phone screen. They looked like two people making a decision together. They looked like two people who were comfortable in the gravity of each other. They looked like two people who had been doing this for a very long time. But it was not Claire who made the photograph significant. Standing slightly behind them, partially visible through the open gate, was an older woman. Sandra Bennett. She was holding a coffee cup. She was watching Daniel and Claire with an expression that Olivia recognized from a dozen family dinners. That particular expression Sandra reserved for things she approved, of a kind of watchful satisfaction that she wore like a woman who believed she knew better than everyone else in the room about what was good for her son. Olivia stared at that photograph for a long time. Then she saved it carefully into the folder with everything else. On the 6th evening, Daniel texted her his flight information. "Landing tomorrow at 4. Can you pick me up or should I grab a car?" She texted back, "I'll be here. No need for a car." She sat at the kitchen table after she sent that message and thought about the phrase, "I'll be here." She thought about how many times she had used those words in their marriage, how many times she had meant them completely and offered them freely and been glad to be the kind of person who kept her word. "I'll be here." She would be here. But she would not be the woman he expected to find. She thought about what the next day was going to look like. About Daniel walking through the front door with his black suitcase and his easy smile and his practiced version of a man coming home from a work trip. She thought about the folder sitting at the center of the kitchen table, clean, organized, devastating, and about the expression on his face when he saw it. She was not afraid. That surprised her even now. She had expected to be afraid. She had expected the fear to find her somewhere in these 6 days to come at her in the middle of the night or in a quiet moment between tasks. But it hadn't. What she felt instead was something that had no clean name, something that sat in the center of her chest, with a particular kind of weight that was not anger and not grief, but something closer to clarity. She had spent 11 years loving a man who had spent 6 of those years building a door she didn't know existed, so he could leave whenever he wanted without her seeing him go. She had spent months in a therapist's office taking apart herself, looking for the flaw. She had buried the grief of a child she lost while he was signing his name on a Chicago property. She had waved goodbye from a front door every October and meant it every single time she had meant it. And tomorrow, he was going to walk back through that door, and she was going to be sitting at that table, and the folder was going to be open. She reached out and placed her hand flat on the cover of the folder for a moment, a small gesture that meant nothing to anyone except her. A way of acknowledging that everything inside it was real, that she had not imagined the past 3 weeks, that she had not invented her own suffering. Then she stood up from the table. She went upstairs. She showered. She set her alarm. She climbed into bed. And she slept deeply without interruption for the first time in 6 days. Not because the hard part was over, but because she was ready for what came next. Across the city, Michael was awake. He had his phone on the nightstand, and he was looking at the ceiling and thinking about his sister sitting alone in that house with a folder full of evidence and a husband coming home tomorrow who had no idea what he was walking into. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "You don't have to do tomorrow alone. I can be there." He waited. The reply came 4 minutes later. "I know, but I need to do this one myself." He stared at the message. Then he set his phone down and looked back at the ceiling. He had been a private investigator for 15 years. He had worked cases involving fraud, infidelity, corporate deception, family secrets that went back decades. He had sat across from a lot of people in a lot of situations and tried to help them find the truth they needed. He had never in 15 years met anyone who found the truth the way Olivia had found it, quietly, precisely, without breaking, without flinching, without once losing her grip on who she was underneath the weight of what she was learning. I thought about the little sister who used to reorganize her bookshelves by color and then by author, and then refused to let anyone touch them because she had a system, who had been 12 years old and already understood that the world made more sense when you imposed order on it carefully and kept track of everything. He thought about what Daniel Bennett had never understood about the woman he married, that she was always going to be the smartest person in the room, that she was always going to find the discrepancy in the numbers, that a woman who had spent her entire professional life knowing exactly where every dollar went was not a woman you could steal from quietly and expect to get away with it forever. Daniel had mistaken her patience for blindness. He had mistaken her trust for ignorance. He had made the single most expensive mistake of his life, and tomorrow, sitting at his own kitchen table, he was going to find that out. Michael turned off the lamp. In the house across the city, Olivia slept, and the folder sat on the kitchen table in the dark, patient and complete, waiting for morning. He came home at 4:17 in the afternoon. Olivia heard the car in the driveway before she saw it. She was already sitting at the kitchen table. She had been sitting there for 40 minutes, long enough that the coffee she had made herself had gone cold, long enough that she had read every document in the folder one final time and closed it and placed her hands flat on top of it and simply waited. She heard the car door. She heard the trunk. She heard the familiar drag of his suitcase wheels across the concrete. That specific sound that for 8 years had meant he was home, he was safe. Everything was fine. That sound had once made something warm move through her chest. Now it moved through her like a current she had no name for. The key in the lock, the door opening. "Hey!" His voice was bright, easy, the voice of a man who had just had a good week. Traffic wasn't bad at all. Flight was actually on time for once. He set the suitcase down in the entryway. She could hear him moving through the hall, dropping his jacket, setting down his bag, doing all the small, ordinary things a man does when he walks back into the home he has not been to in a week. She did not call out to him. She sat. He walked into the kitchen, talking something about the flight, something about the woman who sat next to him, and talked the entire way, and then he stopped. He saw her at the table. He saw the folder. And in the space of about 1 second, something shifted in his face. It was not guilt, not exactly. It was more like a recalibration. The body's involuntary response when the situation it has walked into is not the one it expected. "Hey," he said again, differently this time. "Hi, Daniel," she said. "Sit down." He did not sit immediately. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the table. He attempted a small version of his usual smile. "Everything okay?" "Sit down," she said again. Same tone, same certainty. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She opened the folder. She did not speak yet. She simply turned the first page toward him and let him look at it. It was the photograph, the one Ray had taken outside the townhouse. Daniel and Claire at the gate. Sandra visible behind them with her coffee cup and her particular expression of approval. The color left Daniel's face so fast it was almost clinical to watch. "Olivia, I'm going to talk first," she said, "and you're going to listen. When I'm finished, you can say whatever you need to say. But right now, you're going to sit there and you're going to listen." He closed his mouth. She turned the next page. The property record for the Chicago townhouse. His name on the company registration. The date 6 years ago, 3 months after their miscarriage, the year he had held her hands across the same table and cried with her and told her they were going to get through it together. She watched him look at it. She watched him understand that she had not stumbled onto this, that she had gone looking, that she had found everything. "I called the Grand Meridian Chicago," she said. "They have no record of you, not this year, not any year." She turned another page. "I called Brenda in your corporate travel department. Your company has never hosted a leadership summit in Chicago, not once." She turned another page. "I flew to Chicago the morning after you did. I watched you come through arrivals. I watched you walk straight to Claire Morgan without slowing down, without hesitating, without looking around, the way a man looks around when he's doing something wrong for the first time." She paused. "You didn't look around because you stopped being nervous about it a long time ago." Daniel's hands were flat on the table. He was staring at the documents in front of him, and he had the look of a man who is doing rapid, silent calculations, not about how to explain himself, but about how much she knew and how much more there might be. She answered the question he hadn't asked. "I know about the company," she said. "DBL Consulting Group, LLC, registered 6 years ago in Illinois. No public business activity. One asset, the townhouse at the address in that photograph." She turned to the financial page. "I know about the withdrawals from our joint account, $9,240 over 8 years. I know about the separate personal accounts. I know approximately how much has moved through the company account." She looked up at him. $40,000 to $60,000, Daniel. That's what we're looking at." He made a sound. It was not quite a word. She kept going. "I know your mother has been to that house. I have a photograph of her there. I know she has known about this for at least 4 years. She paused deliberately long enough for him to feel the full weight of what she had just said. 4 years, Daniel. Your mother sat at my dinner table for 4 years and looked me in the eyes, and she knew. That landed differently than the money. She could see it. The financial revelations had made him pale and still, but the mention of Sandra made him flinch, a small, involuntary movement of the shoulders, like a man taking a hit he saw coming and couldn't block anyway. "Olivia," he said. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man trying to find the right angle. "I know how this looks." "I know how it looks too," she said. "That's why I spent 3 weeks making sure I understood what I was seeing before I sat down at this table." He went quiet again. She looked at him across the table. This man she had married, this man whose coffee she had made every morning for 11 years, this man who had kissed her on the cheek 6 days ago and walked out the door with a practiced smile and a suitcase packed for a life she was not supposed to know about. She looked at him and tried to find somewhere in his face the version of him she had married. She found pieces. That was the terrible thing. She still recognized him. But recognition was not the same as trust, and trust, she had learned, was not the same as love, and love, whatever she had felt, whatever she still felt in some buried place, she wasn't ready to examine, was not the same as a reason to stay. "How long has it been going on?" she asked. He looked at the table. "Olivia, how long?" A pause. Long enough that she began to wonder whether he was going to answer at all, and then quietly looking at the table rather than at her. 7 years. 7 years. Not 6. Not the 6 she had calculated from the company registration. 7. She did the math automatically the way she always did. 11 years of marriage, 7 years of the other life. That meant it had started in year 4. The year they had painted the living room together on a long weekend in March and laughed so hard at something stupid that she had gotten paint on the ceiling. The year she had thought they were happy. She had thought they were happy. "Was there ever a conference?" she asked. He shook his head. Barely. A tiny motion. "Not once." Another tiny shake. She breathed. She had known that, of course. She had known it from the moment the hotel told her there was no reservation. But hearing it said, hearing it confirmed by his own mouth in his own voice sitting across from her in their own kitchen, was different from knowing it. It was the difference between reading a diagnosis and hearing a doctor say the words, "Okay," she said. He finally looked up. "Olivia, He stopped. Started again. "I know I don't have any right to explain myself. I know that. But I need you to understand that what happened between you and me, the distance, the years after the miscarriage, it was real. Something broke between us, and I didn't know how to fix it, and I made choices I can't take back." She felt something tighten in her chest, not with grief, with something sharper. "Stop," she said. "I'm not trying to justify. You registered that company 3 months after our miscarriage," she said. Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The words were doing enough on their own. 3 months, Daniel. That means you were already building that life when I was still waking up at 3 in the morning trying to understand how to keep going. That means the distance I blamed myself, for the distance I went to therapy, over the distance I spent 2 years believing was my fault, that was happening while you were signing your name on a property in Chicago." She leaned forward slightly. "You didn't pull away from me because something broke between us. You pulled away from me because you had somewhere else to be." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. Daniel's jaw worked. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not defensiveness, but something rawer than either. Something that looked almost like shame. Real shame, the kind that doesn't have an argument. "You're right," he said. She had not expected that. She sat with it for a moment. In her mind, she had rehearsed versions of this conversation that involved more resistance from him, more deflection, more of the carefully managed explanations that men in his position usually reach for. She had prepared herself for a fight. She had not entirely prepared herself for the moment a man simply stops fighting and tells you that you are right. It did not make her feel better. She wanted to be clear about that inside herself. She was very clear about it. His admission was not absolution. It was not an apology. It was just a man who had run out of angles. She turned to the last page of the folder. She placed it in front of him. It was not a financial document. It was not a photograph. It was the first page of the divorce filing Patricia Hale had prepared. He looked at it. She watched his eyes move across the top of the page and stop. "I've retained a family law attorney who specializes in financial misconduct cases," Olivia said. "The filing includes a full asset disclosure request, which means the company, the property, and all associated accounts will be subject to legal discovery. Patricia has already been in contact with a forensic accountant." She paused. "We are going to find every dollar, Daniel. All of it." He looked up from this page. His face had changed again, the shame still there, but underneath it now, something else. Something tighter. Something that was not quite fear, but was related to it. "You've been planning this," he said. "For 3 weeks, she confirmed. While you were in Chicago," she said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. A different kind of looking than he had done at any other point in the conversation. Not calculating, not defensive, not performing any version of himself. Just looking at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to see. "I didn't think you'd—" He stopped himself. "You didn't think I'd what?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "I thought if you ever found out you'd—" He stopped again. "I'd what, Daniel?" She kept her voice even. She needed to hear this. She needed to hear what he had imagined she would do. "I thought you'd fall apart," he said quietly. The words sat between them. She looked at him. She did not feel the need to respond to it. She did not feel the need to defend herself against the assumption, or to explain to him how wrong he had been, or to show him the evidence of the past 3 weeks as proof. The folder was already open on the table. Patricia Hale already had the filing ready. Michael was a phone call away. Everything she had done was its own answer. So she simply looked at him and let him sit inside what he had just said until he understood it himself, and slowly watching her face, he did. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I know that doesn't—" "Daniel," she said, and something in her tone stopped him completely. "The time for apologies was 7 years ago, before you made the first choice, before you signed your name on that property, before you let your mother come to our family dinners and watch me blame myself for a marriage you had already decided to walk out of. You just never bothered to tell me you were leaving." She sat back. "I don't need your apology. I need you to cooperate with the discovery process, and I need you to not make this more expensive than it has to be." I was quiet. "Can you do that?" she asked. He looked at the divorce filing. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said, barely audible. "Yeah, I can do that." She nodded once. She stood up from the table. "I'm going to stay at my sister-in-law's for a few weeks while the attorneys sort out the initial paperwork. I've already arranged it." She picked up her phone from the table. "You should call someone too. Your mother, maybe. Let her know that I found the photograph." He flinched again. She picked up her bag from the chair beside the door. She walked to the front door, and then she stopped. She had not planned to stop, but something made her turn one last time and look back at the kitchen, at Daniel sitting at the table with his hands flat on the divorce papers and his face emptied of everything he had spent 7 years carefully maintaining. He looked smaller than he had when he walked in. Not physically, he was the same man who had walked through that door 40 minutes ago, but in some other way. Diminished. Revealed. She thought about something Patricia had said to her in their second meeting, when Olivia had asked how people could do this, how they could build a whole secret architecture of deception around someone who trusted them and simply keep going year after year without apparent difficulty. Patricia had said, they do it because they believe the person they're deceiving isn't paying attention. The moment they realize they were wrong about that is usually the moment everything starts to unravel. Olivia looked at Daniel one last time. He was paying attention now. She opened the front door and walked out. The drive to her sister-in-law Karen's house took 22 minutes. She did not cry during the drive. She did not turn on the radio. She drove in complete silence with both hands on the wheel, and she thought about nothing except the road in front of her and the fact that she was moving forward. Karen met her at the door. Karen was Michael's wife, a quiet and steady woman who had known Olivia since college and who had been told just enough to understand the situation without being given more than was necessary. She opened her arms, and Olivia walked into them and stood there for a moment, not crying, just breathing, just being held by someone who loved her without conditions or calculations. "You okay?" Karen asked. "I will be," Olivia said. They went inside. That night, Olivia sat at Karen's kitchen table and called Patricia Hale. "It's done," she said. "He's been served the initial paperwork. He says he'll cooperate." "Good," Patricia said. "We'll proceed with the full financial discovery next week. The forensic accountant is ready." A pause. "How are you holding up?" Olivia thought about the question. She thought about Daniel's voice saying, "I thought you'd fall apart." She thought about 8 years of October goodbyes and waving from the front door and carrying her doubts quietly, because she was the kind of woman who did not make problems. "I'm holding up exactly the way I always have," she said. "I'm just not doing it for him anymore." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start taking everything back." She ended the call. Karen brought her tea. Olivia wrapped both hands around the cup and sat with the warmth of it for a moment. Outside it was full dark. The day was over. Everything she had planned and prepared and held together across 3 weeks of silent, systematic, devastating work had arrived at the moment she had been working toward, and it had gone exactly the way she needed it to go. Not perfectly. There was no perfect version of that conversation. There was no version of sitting across from a man you had loved and watching him confirm word by word everything you had already proven to yourself. There was no version of it that didn't leave something changed in you afterward, not broken, but changed. like a bone that healed stronger at the fracture. She thought about Sandra Bennett. She thought about Sandra at family dinners. Sandra commenting on her appearance. Sandra telling her she looked tired. Sandra holding a coffee cup inside that Chicago townhouse with that particular expression of watchful satisfaction. Sandra was going to get a call from her son tonight. Olivia sat with that for a moment. She was not glad about it, not in the way she might have expected. She did not feel the triumph of it. What she felt was something quieter and more complicated, the recognition that people who help others deceive people they love are never truly separate from the consequences of that deception. Sandra had made herself part of this, and now she was going to live with what that meant. Karen sat down across from her. They did not talk for a while. They drank their tea in the comfortable silence of two women who had known each other long enough not to need words for every moment. Then Karen said quietly, "Michael told me about what you found in Chicago, about how you put it all together." She shook her head. 3 weeks, Olivia. You did all of that in 3 weeks. Olivia looked at her. "He made a mistake," she said simply. "He forgot what I do for a living." Karen looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile exactly, but a real one. "He really did," she said. Olivia set her cup down on the table. She thought about the drive to O'Hare Airport 3 weeks ago, sitting in the back of a car with Michael's 3-word text on her screen. She thought about the airport cafe and the cold coffee, and Daniel walking through those arrivals doors, looking like a man who had arrived at the life that actually made him feel like himself. She thought about Ray driving her north through the Chicago streets, while the city moved past her window. She thought about sitting in that car outside the townhouse, pressing her forehead against the glass, understanding for the first time the full and complete shape of what had been done to her. She had not fallen apart. She had taken notes. And now the notes were in Patricia Hale's office, organized into a legal discovery request that was going to take apart everything Daniel Bennett had spent 7 years carefully building. She looked at Karen. "I'm going to sleep well tonight," she said. Karen nodded. "Good." For the first time in a long time. Karen reached across the table and put her hand over Olivia's. Neither of them said anything else, but somewhere across the city in a kitchen where a folder still sat open on the table, a man was sitting alone with the particular silence of someone who has just understood the difference between the person they underestimated and the person that individual actually was. And it was too late to do anything about it. It had been too late from the moment Olivia Carver picked up the phone on a Saturday morning and asked a hotel in Chicago if they had a reservation under the name Bennett. Too late from the moment the woman on the line said no. Too late from the moment Olivia set the phone down, pressed her hands against the cool kitchen counter, and decided quietly, without drama, without a single word to anyone, that she was going to find out the truth. Not because she wanted to destroy him, because she deserved to know what her own life actually was, and now she knew. And knowing it turned out was the beginning of everything. The forensic accountant's name was Gerald Marsh, and he had been doing this work for 23 years. Patricia Hale had used him on 4 previous cases involving hidden marital assets, and she trusted him the way you trust a surgeon who has performed the same procedure hundreds of times, not because he was warm or reassuring, but because he was precise. He wore the same kind of expression every time he delivered findings, neutral measured, completely unmoved by the human wreckage the numbers represented. That quality, Patricia had told Olivia, was exactly what made him good at his job. Gerald arrived at Patricia's office on a Monday morning, 11 days after Olivia had left the folder on the kitchen table, and walked out of her own home. He sat down across from both women, opened his laptop, and began. "I want to start with what I can confirm conclusively," he said. "And then I'll tell you what I suspect but haven't yet been able to fully document." Olivia sat with her hands in her lap. She had learned over the past 11 days how to receive information without visibly reacting to it. She had gotten very good at it. She sat still and she listened, and she let the facts build their structure around her without allowing herself to feel the full weight of them until she was somewhere private. "The company DBL Consulting Group LLC has been operational for 6 years, Gerald said. In that time, it has received transfers totaling $62,400. Of that amount, I've traced approximately $23,000 back to Daniel Bennett's personal accounts. The remaining $39,000 is more complex." He paused and looked at Olivia. He was giving her a moment to absorb the number. She nodded once. "Keep going." The property, the Chicago townhouse, was purchased for $340,000 6 years ago. The mortgage has been maintained through a combination of company funds and personal account transfers. Current equity in the property sits at approximately $94,000. He turned his laptop slightly so both women could see the screen. The property is by any legal standard a marital asset. It was acquired during the marriage using funds derived in part from joint marital income. Patricia made a note. Olivia did not look at the screen. She was looking at Gerald's face, at the neutral, professional expression of a man who had seen this exact situation many times and was telling her that the law was going to work in her favor. Now, Gerald said, the part I want to flag as requiring additional investigation. He adjusted his glasses. There is a third account, not the company account, not the personal accounts we've already identified. A savings account in Daniel Bennett's name alone opened 8 years ago, the same year the annual trips to Chicago began. This account has received consistent deposits of between $500 and $800 per month for the entirety of those 8 years. The room was very quiet. Olivia calculated it before Gerald could say it. 8 years, average $650 a month, 12 months. Approximately $62,000, Gerald said. She had done the math in under 4 seconds. Total hidden assets, we are prepared to argue in discovery, Gerald said, closing his laptop, are in the range of $210,000, including the equity stake in the property, the company account balance, the personal savings account, and the withdrawals from the joint account. $210,000. Patricia was already writing. Olivia sat with the number and let it be real. She thought about the years she had managed their shared finances carefully, responsibly, the way she managed everything. She thought about the satisfaction she had felt at keeping them on track, building their savings, planning for a future that Daniel had apparently never intended to share with her exclusively. She thought about the word calibrated. He had been doing this for 8 years. Not impulsively, not recklessly, methodically. A few $100s here, a small transfer there, always within the parameters he knew she had set for alerts, always slow enough that the pattern was invisible if you weren't looking for it. He had used her competence against her, her thoroughness, her trust, her absolute confidence that she knew what was happening with their money because she was the one watching it. He had used all of that as cover. She breathed. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. "There's one more thing," he said. She looked at him. "The property in Chicago has a second name on the deed, not a co-owner, a designated beneficiary in the event of Daniel's death." He paused. "The beneficiary is not you." She had known it wouldn't be. She had known since the moment she learned the property existed that her name would be nowhere near it. But hearing it said sitting in Patricia's office on a Monday morning with the full financial picture laid out in front of her still landed with a particular weight. She was his wife. She had been his wife for 11 years, and her name was not on a single line of what he had built in secret. "Claire Morgan," she asked. "Claire Morgan," Gerald confirmed. She nodded. She looked at Patricia. "Does that change anything legally?" "No," Patricia said. "The property is still classified as a marital asset, regardless of the beneficiary designation. The designation itself may be challenged. We'll add it to the filing." She set her pen down. "Olivia, I want you to hear this clearly. The documentation Gerald has put together, combined with the evidence you gathered before we were involved, gives us one of the strongest financial misconduct cases I've seen in 14 years of practice. Daniel's attorney is going to know immediately that fighting this is going to cost more than cooperating." Olivia sat back in her chair. "When does Daniel's attorney get the full disclosure?" she asked. "End of this week," Patricia said. "I expect we'll hear back within 48 hours of that. And if he decides not to cooperate, then we take it to discovery. We get a judge involved and everything Gerald just described becomes part of a public court record." Patricia looked at her steadily. "His company will see it. His colleagues will see it. Anyone who wants to know what Daniel Bennett did with his marriage's money will be able to find out." Olivia thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Send the disclosure." The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Olivia was at Karen's kitchen table with her laptop open, working, because work had become the thing that kept her grounded during the week since she had walked out of her house, the familiar language of numbers and patterns and clear-eyed analysis that had always made the world feel manageable. Her phone rang. Patricia's number. She answered immediately. "His attorney called," Patricia said. "Daniel wants to meet." Olivia set her coffee down. To negotiate. That's what they're calling it. What do you think they actually want? Patricia paused. I think they looked at Gerald's report and realized they are holding a very weak hand. I think they want to see if they can minimize the property settlement. Another pause. I also think Daniel may want to talk to you directly. His attorney mentioned the possibility of a joint meeting. Olivia thought about sitting across from Daniel again. She thought about the kitchen table conversation, his face, when she turned the first page of the folder, the way the color left him when he saw Sandra in the photograph. She thought about what he had said near the end. I thought you'd fall apart. I'll do the joint meeting, she said, on one condition. Patricia is present the entire time, and if Daniel's attorney tries to redirect the conversation away from the financial specifics, we end the meeting immediately. Agreed, Patricia said. I'll set it up for next Tuesday. She ended the call. She sat with her phone in her hand for a moment. Then she texted Michael. He wants to negotiate. Meeting Tuesday. His reply came in under a minute, the way his replies always did when it involved this. Do you want me there? She thought about it. Then, no, but stay near your phone. Always, he wrote back. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning at Patricia's office. Olivia arrived 8 minutes early. She sat in the chair she had been sitting in every time she came here, the one that faced the door, and she arranged her expression into the same controlled neutrality she had been practicing for weeks. Daniel arrived exactly on time. He looked different than he had the evening she confronted him. Less diminished. He had recovered some of his composure, which she had expected. He was wearing a suit she recognized, the gray one he wore to serious meetings, the one he had always worn when he needed to project authority. He had prepared himself. He had gotten his legs back under him. She watched him sit down across the table from her, and she thought, it doesn't matter. His attorney was a man named Douglas Farr, early 50s, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who specialized in keeping wealthy men from losing too much in their divorces. Olivia had researched him the moment Patricia told her his name. He was good at what he did. He was also, Patricia had told her quietly, the kind of attorney who knew immediately when a case was unwinnable and pivoted to damage control. He was pivoting. The meeting opened with the standard formal language, both sides acknowledging the documentation, both sides confirming they had reviewed Gerald Marsh's findings. Douglas Farr spoke calmly, reasonably, the way men speak when they are trying to make an unreasonable position sound like a sensible compromise. My client acknowledges the existence of the assets identified in the forensic report, Douglas said. He is prepared to negotiate an equitable settlement that reflects both parties' contributions to the marriage and accounts for the assets in question. Patricia looked at Olivia. Olivia gave the smallest nod. Define equitable, Patricia said. Douglas Farr placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a settlement proposal, clean-typed, formatted with the professional confidence of a document that was supposed to look final. Olivia picked it up and read it. He was offering her the joint account balance, half of their shared home equity, and a monthly support payment for 2 years. The Chicago property was not mentioned. She set the paper down. She looked at Douglas Farr, and then she looked at Daniel. This was the first time she had looked directly at him since he sat down, and she held his gaze for a deliberate moment before she spoke. The Chicago property is not in this proposal, she said. Douglas Farr began to answer. She kept her eyes on Daniel. Daniel, she said, I'm asking you. Farr stopped. Daniel looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at her. The property is... He paused. Claire has been living there. It's complicated. It is not complicated, Olivia said. It is a marital asset purchased with marital funds. Gerald Marsh has documented the funding trail completely. The property is part of the settlement, or we take this to full discovery and let a judge decide. She kept her voice even. I want to be clear about what full discovery means. It means your company's HR department will receive documentation of how you funded a private residence during your marriage using business-adjacent accounts. It means your colleagues will have access to the public record. It means your mother's documented involvement will become part of the case file. She paused. I don't want to do that to you, Daniel, but I will. The room was very quiet. Douglas Farr looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the table. What happened next was the thing Olivia had not prepared herself for, because she had prepared herself for resistance, for calculation, for the careful maneuvering of a man who still had enough composure to fight. She had not prepared herself for Daniel Bennett to put both hands flat on the conference table and simply say quietly, without looking at his own attorney, She's right, put the property in. Douglas Farr's pen stopped moving. "Daniel," he started. "Put it in," Daniel said again. Not loudly, not dramatically. The voice of a man who has stopped fighting something he knows he deserved to lose. "She's right about all of it. Just put it in." Farr was quiet for a moment. Then he made a note. Patricia did not react visibly, but Olivia saw her press her pen tip against her notepad just slightly harder than usual. It was the closest thing to satisfaction that Patricia Hale ever showed in a meeting. There was more discussion after that. Details, specifics, timelines. The language of ending a marriage efficiently and completely. But the central battle was over in that moment. The moment Daniel looked at everything she had laid in front of him and chose finally to stop pretending she hadn't found it. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. When it ended, Douglas Farr shook Patricia's hand and left. Daniel stood up from the table and picked up his jacket, and for a moment he just stood there, not moving toward the door, not speaking, just existing in the same room as Olivia, with the full weight of what they had just agreed to settling around both of them. She waited. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't—" "Daniel," she said his name the way she had at the kitchen table. Quiet. Final. "I believe you. I also need you to understand that I stopped needing the apology somewhere around week 2. She looked at him steadily. "What I needed was for you to stop lying. You're doing that now. That's enough." He looked at her for a long moment. The gray suit, the composed face, the silver at his temples that had come in over the past few years. She knew this face so well. She knew where the lines had deepened and where they hadn't. She knew the way his expression changed when he was about to say something he hadn't fully decided on yet. "You're the most capable person I've ever known," he said. She did not know what to do with that, so she said nothing. He walked out. She sat down. Patricia came around the table and sat in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her, which was unusual and deliberate. "How are you doing?" Patricia asked. Olivia thought about it honestly. "I keep waiting for the part where I fall apart," she said. "Maybe that part isn't coming," Patricia said. Olivia considered that. "Maybe not." "The property settlement gives you full equity value," Patricia said, moving back into the work, both of them more comfortable there. "Combined with the joint account recovery and the support structure we're looking at recovering close to the full $210,000 that Gerald identified." She paused. "It will take a few more months to finalize everything, but Olivia, you won this." Olivia sat with the word won. It felt strange. She did not feel like a winner. She felt like a woman who had gone into her own life with a flashlight and found the things that had been hidden from her for 7 years and had dealt with them one by one and was now sitting in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning that looked completely ordinary from the outside and was anything but. She thought about the phone call she still had to make. She had been avoiding it for 2 weeks. Not out of fear, she had moved past fear somewhere in the middle of the second week at Karen's house. But out of a kind of reluctance, she couldn't entirely name a recognition that some conversations change things in ways that can't be undone, and that once she made this call, the last piece of it would be real, in a way it wasn't quite yet. She drove home from Patricia's office home, meaning Karen's house, which had become home in the strange temporary way of places you live in during the most significant weeks of your life. She sat in the car in the driveway for a moment. Then she took her phone out and dialed. Sandra Bennett answered on the third ring. "Olivia." Sandra's voice was careful. She had been expecting this call. Of course she had. Daniel had almost certainly spoken to her. "I've been meaning to reach out to you." "Sandra," Olivia said, "I'm not calling to have a conversation. I'm calling to tell you something." Sandra went quiet. "I have a photograph of you at the Chicago property," Olivia said. "It has been documented as part of the legal record. Your visits to that address and your knowledge of Daniel's relationship with Claire Morgan are part of the case file." She paused. "I don't intend to pursue any action against you personally. You are not a party to the divorce. But I need you to understand that your choice to involve yourself, to sit at my dinner table and look me in the eyes for 4 years while knowing what you knew, that is something you are going to have to live with. Not me, you." Silence on the line. Then Sandra said in a voice that was smaller than Olivia had ever heard from her, "I was trying to protect my son." Olivia sat with that for a moment. "You were protecting your son," she said slowly, "by letting me believe I was the problem, by making me question myself, by letting me carry 4 years of guilt for a marriage that he had already decided to fracture." She kept her voice steady. "That is not protection, Sandra. That is participation." Another long silence. "I'm sorry," Sandra said. The words came out the way words come out when a person has held them back for a long time and finally runs out of places to put them. "I'm genuinely sorry, Olivia." Olivia breathed. "I know," she said. And she did know. She believed it. A person can be genuinely sorry for something they did deliberately, and it changes nothing about the fact that they did it. Apologies and accountability are not the same thing. Sandra's sorrow was real and it was hers to carry. "Take care of yourself," Olivia said. She ended the call. She sat in the car. The last piece of it was done. She thought about who she had been before all of this. The woman who stood at the door every October and waved, the woman who went to therapy to work on herself, the woman who had spent so long looking inward for the source of problems that were being created from the outside by someone she trusted. She thought about that woman with something that was neither contempt nor grief, but something closer to tenderness. That woman had done nothing wrong. She had loved someone and trusted someone and believed in the life she was building, and none of those things were failures. She picked up her phone and called Michael. He answered before the first ring finished. "How'd it go?" "Property goes into the settlement," she said. "Full equity, $210,000 recovered." He was quiet for a second. Then, "Olivia, I know. That's everything. I know." She heard him exhale slowly, the long, measured breath of a man releasing something he had been holding for weeks. "I also called Sandra," she said. "How was that?" She thought about Sandra's voice going small, about the apology that came out like something that had been stored under pressure. "It was what it needed to be," she said. "It's done." "And you?" Michael asked. "How are you?" She looked out through the windshield at Karen's house, at the porch where Karen had left the light on even though it was the middle of the afternoon, at the ordinary front door of a house that had become a temporary shelter for a woman in the middle of rebuilding what came next. "I'm going to need a place to live," she said. Michael laughed, the first real laugh she had heard from him in weeks. "Yeah," he said. "Let's work on that." She smiled. She got out of the car. She walked into the house. Karen was in the kitchen, and she looked up when Olivia walked in and read her face immediately, the way people who know you well can read the settlement of an expression and know before a single word has been spoken that something has shifted. "Well," Karen said. "It's done," Olivia said. Karen pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. Then she said, "Sit down. I'll make dinner." And Olivia sat. And for the first time in a very long time, sitting felt like rest instead of waiting. But there was one more thing. One thing that Olivia had not told Patricia or Michael or Karen. One thing she had been carrying alone since the second week at Karen's house, when a text message had arrived from a number she didn't recognize. She still had the message saved. She had read it dozens of times. It said, "My name is Claire Morgan. I think we need to talk. I understand completely if you don't want to. But I need you to know I didn't know he was married until 2 years ago. I have been trying to leave ever since. He wouldn't let me." She had not responded. She had not told anyone. She had sat with those words, "I didn't know he was married until 2 years ago," and let them rearrange everything she thought she had understood about the shape of Daniel's deception. Because if Claire was telling the truth, and something in Olivia, the same instinct that had made her a good analyst for 20 years, told her that she was, then the story was not what she had believed it to be. Daniel Bennett had not just deceived his wife, he had deceived both of them. And there was a woman in Chicago who had spent 2 years trying to find a way out of a trap she hadn't known she was walking into. Olivia looked at the message one more time. Then she typed 2 words, "Tell me," and she pressed send. Claire Morgan replied at 11:17 that night. Olivia was sitting up in the guest bed at Karen's house, with her back against the headboard and her phone in both hands, still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she sent those 2 words. "Tell me," 3 hours earlier. She had not expected to hear back so quickly. She had half convinced herself that the silence would simply extend indefinitely, that Claire would think better of it, that the message would remain unanswered the way so many things people intend to say remain unanswered because the moment passes and the courage goes with it. But the reply came, not as one message, as 4 sent one after another in rapid succession, the way people write when they have been holding something for so long that the moment a door opens, they cannot stop themselves from walking through it completely. The first, "Thank you for responding. I honestly wasn't sure you would." The second I met Daniel 7 years ago at a networking event in Chicago. He told me he was divorced. He showed me divorce papers. I didn't find out they were forged until 2 years ago. The third, when I found out, I tried to leave immediately. He told me if I ended things, he would make sure I lost my job. He knew my department head personally. He had done the man a significant professional favor. He knew exactly how to use that. I was terrified, and I had no one I trusted enough to tell. The fourth, I am so sorry for what he did to you. You did not deserve any of it. And I need you to know, neither did I. Olivia read the messages once through without stopping. Then she read them a second time slower. Then she set the phone face down on the bed beside her and sat in the dark of Karen's guest room and let the full architecture of what she had just read rearrange itself inside her mind. Forged divorce papers. She said the phrase very quietly in the dark, just moving her lips around it, not quite speaking it aloud because she needed to test it against the air to see if it stayed real outside of her own head, or whether it dissolved the way some things dissolve when you try to share them with the world. It stayed real. Forged divorce papers. She had thought she understood the complete shape of Daniel's deception. She had thought that 3 weeks of investigation, a forensic accountant, a former private investigator, a family law attorney with 14 years of experience, $62,000, traced through a shadow company, a townhouse on the north side of Chicago, and a confrontation at her own kitchen table with a folder full of evidence had given her the full picture. She had been wrong. Not about the facts she had uncovered. Every single one of those facts was real and documented and legally solid. But she had been wrong about the scope. She had understood that Daniel had built a secret life alongside their marriage. She had not understood that the secret life itself contained another lie at its center, that the woman inside it had been deceived just as deliberately, just as systematically, just from a different angle. 2 women, 1 man, a structure of control, so carefully designed that it had taken everything Olivia had, every professional skill, every personal resource, every relationship she trusted, just to see the edges of it. And even then, she had only seen her half. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and typed, "Can we meet in person? I'll come to Chicago. Give me 3 days." The reply came back in under 2 minutes. "Yes, whatever you need, I'll be here." She put the phone down. She did not sleep for a long time after that. She lay in Karen's guest bed in the dark, and she thought about the word forged and about what it meant to show another person a fabricated document and watch them believe it and build 5 years of their life on top of that belief. She thought about Claire Morgan building her life in Chicago, choosing that city, choosing that neighborhood, choosing a career path that kept her accessible to a man who had told her she was his future, and doing all of it on a foundation that Daniel had manufactured from scratch. She thought about this particular cruelty of that. Not passionate cruelty, not even angry cruelty, deliberate, calculated, patient cruelty, the kind that requires planning. She thought about herself in a therapist's office, examining her own flaws while Daniel was in Chicago. She thought about Claire trying to leave and being stopped by the careful application of professional threat. She thought about 2 women in 2 cities, both held in place by 2 different mechanisms, both designed by the same man, both maintained with the same practiced ease. She breathed. She made herself breathe slowly and deliberately until the feeling in her chest settled into something she could work with. Then she made a list in her head of everything she needed to do in the next 3 days. The list was long. That was fine. She had always worked best when there was a list. 3 days later, Olivia walked into a coffee shop on the north side of Chicago and sat in a chair that faced the door because she was always the kind of woman who sat facing the door, and she ordered a coffee she suspected she would not finish, and she waited. Claire Morgan arrived 3 minutes early. She was smaller in person than she had appeared at the airport. Olivia registered that immediately, the way you always register the gap between the imagined version of a person and the real one. She was wearing a plain dark sweater and carrying the same canvas bag from the airport photograph. She stopped inside the door and looked across the room, and when her eyes found Olivia, her face did something complicated. Not quite relief, not quite shame, something that sat in the space between them where neither word was sufficient. She walked over. She sat down. They looked at each other across the small table for a moment. 2 women who had never spoken, who had been connected by a man who had lied to both of them, sitting 3 feet apart in a coffee shop in a city that was both of their stories and neither of their homes. Claire spoke first. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that I understand completely if you walked in here furious at me. I would understand it. I want you to know that before anything else." "I'm not furious at you," Olivia said. Claire looked at her steadily like she was checking whether that was the truth. "I mean it," Olivia said. "I spent about 4 hours being angry at you very early on before I understood what you actually were in this situation. Once I understood, the anger went somewhere else." She paused. "It went to where it belonged." Claire nodded slowly. Something in her shoulders released a small, almost invisible shift, but Olivia caught it. "Tell me about the papers," Olivia said. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She had the composure of someone who had been maintaining composure through sustained effort for a long time, and up close that effort was visible in the fine lines around her eyes and the particular set of her jaw. "He gave them to me about 6 months after we started seeing each other," she said. "He said he had finalized his divorce the previous year, that it had been an amicable separation, with no children involved, that both parties had moved on. The papers they looked professional. They had the right formatting, what appeared to be the right courthouse stamps. I wasn't looking for fraud. I had no reason to look for fraud. He was warm and consistent, and he always did exactly what he said he was going to do." She paused. "He was very good at that, doing exactly what he said he was going to do." "How was," Olivia said. The bitterness in those 2 words was precise and controlled. "For almost 5 years I believed everything," Claire continued. "I thought the reason he traveled between Cincinnati and Chicago was work. I thought the reason he couldn't fully relocate was his company requiring a physical presence in Ohio. I thought—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I built my whole life around his schedule, around his visits, around the idea that we were working towards something, that we were heading somewhere." She shook her head. "He was very good at the idea of heading somewhere." Olivia thought about 11 years of heading somewhere. The future plans they had made together, the vacations they were going to take, the home improvements they had been budgeting for, the vague and comfortable conversations about retirement that couples have when they assume they will be retiring together. She had believed in all of it. She had organized their finances around all of it. She had treated the future as a place they were moving toward together. She said nothing. She let Claire keep talking. "2 years ago his mother came to the house," Claire said. Her voice changed, slightly tightened. "Sandra." Olivia went very still. "She and Daniel had argued on the phone the night before. I heard part of it through the wall, nothing specific, just the tone, tense. Something had cracked between them." Claire paused. "The next morning Daniel went out to run errands and Sandra and I were alone in the house. She sat down across from me and she just said it, directly. She said, 'You know he has a wife, a real wife, in Cincinnati. You should know what you are to him.' The words landed between them on the table like something dropped from a height." Olivia breathed. She was doing the calculation. Sandra had known about Claire for at least 4 years. They had the photograph to prove it. Sandra had been civil to Claire for most of that time, had played her role in the parallel life Daniel had constructed, had sat in that Chicago kitchen with her coffee cup and her particular expression. And then something had broken between Sandra and Daniel, some private argument that Olivia would never know the full content of, and Sandra had used Claire as the instrument of her anger. Sandra had not told Claire out of conscience. Sandra had told Claire to hurt Daniel, and in doing so she had broken the entire structure. "What did you do when she told you?" Olivia asked. "I called him immediately," Claire said. "He was still in the neighborhood. He came back within 15 minutes. I told him to explain. He denied it for about 10 minutes, very calmly, very steadily. He was good at denial too. And then something in him just stopped. He stopped denying and he started explaining." She paused. "His explanations were the worst part. Not because they were angry, because they were reasonable. He explained everything in this reasonable, measured voice, like I was a project meeting that had gone slightly off track and just needed to be brought back on agenda." Olivia recognized that voice. She had heard that voice at the conference table when Douglas Farr had presented the initial settlement offer. She had heard it at the kitchen table when Daniel had started to explain, and she had stopped him. That particular practiced reasonableness was not a tone, it was a strategy. "I told him to get out," Claire said. "I was clear. I packed a bag of his things. I put it by the door. I told him we were done." She looked at the table for a moment. He picked up the bag and looked at me and said very quietly, not threateningly. That was the thing. Never threateningly. He said that endings were complicated, that he had some professional relationships that were interconnected with mine, and that he wanted to make sure we handled things carefully so that nobody's situation was unnecessarily complicated. He threatened your job without using the word threat, Olivia said. He threatened my job without using the word threat, Claire confirmed. He didn't raise his voice once. He was completely calm. She finally looked up. I didn't know what to do. I had built my life around him, not because I was stupid. You weren't stupid, Olivia said immediately, firmly. I know that now, Claire said. It took me a while to know it. She paused. I stayed. Not because I wanted to, because I was scared and I didn't know how to get out without losing everything else. And he came back every October, and every time he came through that door I felt sick with it, and I kept thinking I would figure out how to leave. I would find a way, and every time I started to move toward it, he would say something or do something that reminded me of what he had access to professionally, and I would... She stopped, pressed her hands flat on the table. I would stop. Olivia looked at her across the table. She thought about the word calibrated again, the word she had used to herself in those early weeks when she was first understanding the financial architecture of what Daniel had built. She had used it to describe the bank withdrawals, their precise size, their careful timing, their deliberate invisibility. But calibrated was the word for all of it. Every part of what Daniel had constructed was calibrated. The size of each lie, the pacing of each deception, the amount of pressure to apply and exactly when to apply it, the precise threshold of enough and not too much maintained across 2 relationships in 2 cities for 7 years without ever letting either of them see the other until Sandra broke. He had been a careful man, the most dangerous kind. I need to ask you something, Olivia said. Claire looked at her and waited. Why did you text me the real reason, not the version that's only about wanting me to know the truth? Claire was quiet for a moment. She was not collecting herself. She was simply deciding how honest to be. Olivia watched her make the decision. Both things are true, Claire said. I wanted you to know the full picture because you deserve to. And I still live in that house, the house he owns, the house that is about to become part of your legal settlement. She met Olivia's eyes directly. I don't have anywhere to go on short notice, and I don't have enough saved to move quickly. I reached out to you because you are the person who holds the outcome, and because you are the only person who might understand that I didn't choose any of this. She paused. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to see me. Olivia sat with that for a long time, the request underneath the request, not for money, not for legal protection, for the particular thing that had been denied to both of them by the same person, the experience of being fully seen by someone who understood what they were actually looking at. I see you, Olivia said. Claire's breath went out slowly. And I'll talk to my attorney about the sale timeline, Olivia continued. I can't make promises about what's legally possible, but there may be flexibility in the schedule. I'll find out. I don't, Claire started. I know you're not asking me to fix it, Olivia said. I know what you're asking for, but I can try to do both. Claire looked at her for a long moment. Why? Olivia thought about the question seriously. Because I'm not Daniel, she said. I don't use what I have access to as leverage against people who are already in a difficult position. She paused. And because this is not your fault. Any of it. You were handed forged documents by a man who spent 7 years lying to me too. The least I can do is not treat you like a casualty. Claire Morgan, who had been holding herself together through an act of sustained effort for 2 years, pressed her lips together and looked at the table. She did not cry. She was too composed for that, or too accustomed to the effort of not crying in front of people. But something in her face changed, that specific change that happens when a person who has been braced against the world for a long time is unexpectedly not met with resistance. Thank you, she said quietly. They talked for another hour. Not about Daniel. They had said what needed to be said about him, and neither of them had any interest in spending more time in that territory than necessary. They talked about what came next. Claire's job, which she had managed to protect through the 2 years of silent paralysis, partly through her own professional competence, and partly because whatever leverage Daniel had quietly threatened to exercise, he had never actually exercised it. Maybe he had never intended to. Maybe it had always been the suggestion of control more than the substance of it. That was the thing about men like Daniel Olivia had come to understand. They relied on the belief in their power more than the power itself. The The belief was often sufficient. It had been sufficient with Claire for 2 years. It had not been sufficient with Olivia. She flew back to Cincinnati that afternoon. Michael was waiting at arrivals with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face in its usual composed expression that she had known since childhood and could read perfectly. He was worried. He was also trying not to show that he was worried, which meant he had read the careful neutrality of her text messages and was preparing himself for news that could go in several directions. "How was it?" he asked. She walked beside him toward the parking structure and told him everything. The messages, the coffee shop, Claire's face when she said, "I see you," the forged papers, Sandra's calculated revelation, the 2-year trap. She laid it out in the same order she had organized everything else chronologically clearly, without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight they actually had. Michael listened without interrupting, which was the thing she had always valued most about him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Forged legal documents." "Yes. Olivia, I know. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal." "I know," she said. "I'm calling Patricia today." He stopped walking and looked at her. "Are you ready for what that means? Criminal proceedings are different. They take longer. They're more public. His name, his company, all of it goes into a different kind of record." She looked at her brother. She thought about what ready meant. She had been asking herself that question since October, since the Saturday morning. She called a hotel and heard 12 words that changed everything. She had asked herself whether she was ready to follow him, ready to confront him, ready to file, ready to meet with Claire, ready for each successive layer of the truth as it revealed itself. She thought she understood now that ready was not a destination. It was a practice. You got ready by doing the thing, not by waiting until the fear was gone. "I'm ready," she said. Patricia received the information about the forged documents on a Thursday morning. The call lasted 51 minutes. Olivia sat at Karen's kitchen table with her coffee and walked Patricia through everything with the same systematic precision she brought to every difficult conversation, and she heard in Patricia's voice the particular controlled intensity of a lawyer whose case has just expanded in a direction she had not anticipated but was entirely prepared for. "Document forgery in a domestic context carries significant criminal exposure," Patricia said. "This is not a civil enhancement to the divorce proceedings. This is a separate criminal matter that will involve law enforcement." "I understand," Olivia said. "I'll need Claire Morgan to provide a formal statement, signed, notarized, and as detailed as she can make it." "She's already agreed," Olivia said. A pause. "You asked her before you called me." "I asked her before I flew home," Olivia said. Another pause. "You're very thorough." "I've been told that," Olivia said. Patricia made a sound that in anyone else would have been a laugh. In Patricia, it was the closest equivalent. "I'll draft the documentation request for Claire today. And Olivia, I want you to hear this. What you've uncovered in the past several months goes significantly beyond what most people in your situation ever find. Most people walk away with far less because they don't know where to look, or they're too hurt to keep looking. You found everything. And because you found everything, Daniel Bennett is going to face consequences that are going to follow him in ways that the civil settlement alone never could have." Olivia sat with that for a moment. "That was never the goal," she said. "I know," Patricia said. "That's why it matters." She ended the call. She sat at Karen's table. Outside, a car passed on the street. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Thursday that had no idea it was the day that the last piece of the case locked into place. She thought about the Saturday morning that had started all of it. The hotel call, the 12 words. She thought about how small that moment had looked from the outside, a woman alone in her kitchen, a cup of coffee going cold, a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes. She thought about how the entire direction of her life had turned on that moment, not because of anything dramatic, but because she had been paying attention. Because she had been the kind of person who noticed when a pattern didn't fit, and because she had been finally the kind of person who did not look away. She called Michael. "Patricia's filing the criminal referral," she said when he picked up. He breathed out slowly. "Okay. It'll take time. Months, probably. Maybe longer." "Are you okay with that?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm not going to spend the next year watching the proceedings," she said. "I'm going to let Patricia and the legal system handle what they're designed to handle, and I'm going to spend the next year doing something else." "What's something else?" "Finding a house," she said. "Actually sleeping through the night, learning what it feels like to make decisions that are entirely mine. Michael was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a good plan. I thought so, she said. The divorce finalized on a Wednesday in March. Olivia sat in Patricia's office and signed the last document and watched Patricia add her own signature as the attorney of record. And that was that. 11 years of marriage, a folder full of evidence, a forensic accountant named Gerald Marsh, a former investigator and his colleague Ray, a coffee shop in Chicago, $212,000 in recovered assets, a criminal referral to the state attorney's office, and a woman named Claire Morgan who had texted 2 sentences that broke open the final layer of a story Olivia had thought she already fully understood. All of it compressed into the last pen stroke on the last document. Done. Patricia shook her hand, said the things that are said in that moment. Olivia thanked her genuinely specifically in the way she thanked people when she wanted them to know she meant it. She walked out of Patricia's office into a Tuesday afternoon that was cold and bright and belonged entirely to her. She found her house in April. It had a kitchen with good morning light and a yard that needed attention and a front door that faced east. She made an offer the same afternoon the realtor showed it to her. She did not ask anyone's opinion. She did not run the decision past anyone. She looked at the east-facing door and the morning light and the yard that needed work, and she thought yes, and then she said yes, and that was how she chose it. She closed in 6 weeks. On moving day, Michael and Karen came with boxes. Her colleague Denise brought wine and 3 kinds of cheese, she said, were non-negotiable for a proper housewarming. Her colleague Tom brought a plant and said he had been reliably informed that plants were the correct housewarming gift, and Olivia told him it was exactly right and meant it and put it on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light was best. By 9 o'clock that night, everyone had gone home and the house was hers, imperfect and half-assembled and entirely completely hers. She sat on her couch, the one she had chosen herself without consulting anyone, positioned exactly where she wanted it, in a room that was quietly becoming the shape of her life. She texted Claire, "Moved in today." The reply came quickly, "How does it feel?" She looked around the room, at the boxes that still needed unpacking, at Tom's plant on the windowsill, at the east-facing door that would catch the morning sun in a few hours, at the quiet of a space that had never known Daniel Bennett's name. She typed, "Like something that's actually mine." Claire replied, "Good, that's how it should feel." Then a moment later, "I moved into my new apartment last month. It's small. I wake up every morning relieved." Olivia read that last sentence twice. "I wake up every morning relieved." She understood that sentence in her body before she understood it in her mind. The particular relief of waking up in a space that belongs to you, in a life that belongs to you where the first thought of the day is not a calculation about someone else, not wondering where they are or what they're thinking, or whether the distance you feel is your fault, or whether you should be doing something differently to close it. Just waking up, just being there, just relief. She set her phone down on the cushion beside her. She sat in the quiet of her house. She thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of this, the woman at the front door in October waving believing. She thought about that woman with something that was not contempt and not grief, but something closer to a deep and aching tenderness. That woman had loved someone with her whole heart. She had managed their money and their future and their home with care and competence. She had gone to therapy and done the work and tried to understand the distance in her marriage by examining herself. She had been a good wife to a man who had decided she was a useful one. None of that made her a fool. None of that was a failure. It was simply what happened when an honest person's trust is met with a dishonest person's planning. She had been honest. He had been planning. And she had outlasted the plan. She thought about Patricia saying you found everything. She thought about Michael at the airport in that first moment asking, "Are you sure?" and her saying absolutely yes. She thought about sitting in the back of Ray's car outside a Chicago townhouse, watching her husband carry his suitcase through a gate, and understanding with the clean finality of a number that has been checked and rechecked, and will not change, that the life she had believed in was not the life she had been living. She had survived that moment. She had done something with it. She stood up from the couch and walked through her house, through the kitchen, with its good light through the hallway, with its unpacked boxes to the front door that faced east. She put her hand on the door handle for a moment, not opening it, just feeling the solid reality of it. Tomorrow morning the sun would come through the panels on either side of this door and fill the entryway with light. She would make coffee in her kitchen. She would sit at her own table and begin whatever came next. Not because someone was coming home to her, not because she was waiting for anyone, because she was already where she needed to be. The woman who had spent 8 Octobers standing at a door waving goodbye had packed her own suitcase, found her own truth, signed her own name, and walked through her own door. She was not the woman who waited anymore. She was the woman who went looking and found everything.